I am fascinated by the intersection of fan fiction and published literature. So, of course, when I learned that The Love Hypothesis by Ali Hazelwood was adapted from a Reylo fanfiction, I had to read it. I think the most famous example of fanfic turned published book is, of course, 50 Shades of Grey. As most people know by now, 50 Shades started out as a Twilight AU fanfic called Master of the Universe. Not to be confused with Masters of the Universe, despite the similarities between Christian Grey and Skeletor. For those who are pure of heart and mind, untainted by the vast yet untamed world of fanfiction, Reylo is the nickname for the romantic pairing of Rey and Kylo Ren, i.e. Ben Solo, from the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And AU means alternate universe. You take characters from a story and place them in some sort of entirely different setting. However, you maintain core tenets of their personality, and you tend to adapt their backstory and different characteristics in a way that makes sense for the new setting. Instead of Bella being a high school student and Edward being a vampire, Bella is now a college student, and Edward is a rich CEO who loves BDSM. Or Bella could be the barista in a coffee shop, and Edward could be the shy, piano-playing poet who comes in there every day. Or they could be neighbors in an apartment building. If you can dream it, chances are somebody has written it. So all I knew going into this Reylo book was that it was an AU where they were scientists at Stanford and they had to fake date for some reason. As with most fanfics turned published book, the original was stripped from the internet as soon as the visage of traditional publishing appeared on the horizon. However, nothing on the internet is ever truly gone, so I managed to find it. The original fanfiction entitled Head Over Feet. Which means this video will be filmed in 2 parts. First, I have read The Love Hypothesis, which I will recap and discuss with you today, and then I will retreat back to my cave and read the entire 400-page PDF of Head Over Feet, and then I will come back and I will discuss how the book and the fanfiction are similar and how they are different. Of course, through the magic of editing, this will all be one video for you. But I really wanted my first reading of this book to be just pure and straightforward. I wanted to see if I could identify the twice transformed Star Wars elements of the story. Again, calling back to 50 Shades, Edward's obsessive need to control Bella and her actions, as well as his need to restrain from killing her, transformed into the concept of Christian Grey's need for BDSM. Bella's Native American friend, Jacob, who was in love with her and didn't understand boundaries, became Anna's Hispanic friend, Jose, who was in love with her and didn't understand boundaries. Bella's old truck that she got from Jacob's dad became Anna's old Volkswagen that she got from Jose's dad, and so on. The pieces are still generally there in these books that are adapted from AU fanfictions. So I wanted to see if I could identify those elements in the Love Hypothesis without seeing them essentially spelled out for me in the fanfic. Okay, so from this point forward, there will be spoilers for this book. Gee, I bet you can't guess how this romance novel will end. Don't want to ruin it for you. The Love Hypothesis was written by Ali Hazelwood and published in 2021 by Jove. By Jove, I think they've got it. It was published in 2021 by Jove, which is an imprint of Penguin Random House. So this is legit traditional publishing. It's not self-published or published through a vanity press or anything like that. Not that there is anything wrong with self-publishing, it's just when I point out that this came through the venue of traditional publishing, it means that a lot of people had to read and review this book. Before we begin, it needs to be pointed out that these two characters are very clearly Rey and Kylo Ren, or more like Rey and Ben Solo. Just look at the cover art. That's clearly Rey and Ben, except their names are Olive and Adam, which, I mean, Adam Driver? Come on. Although I should clarify that I mean this is obviously Rey and Ben in the sense of looking at this as a former Reylo fanfic. I don't think that, like, the average reader who's maybe never seen the Star Wars sequel trilogy could pick this book up and start paging through it and say, wow, these Stanford scientists sure seem a lot like Jedi. We're given a prologue where Olive is interviewing for a graduate science program at Stanford, even though she's not entirely sure that that's what she wants to do with the rest of her life. And she runs into a bathroom because her very expired contact lenses are irritating her eyes. Because you see, she's poor and can't afford new contacts. But there's a guy in the bathroom, and even though she is so very blinded by her contacts that she cannot see his face remotely at all, they have a surprisingly thoughtful discussion about her goals and about becoming a scientist. This mystery man inspires her to say yes when she receives an offer to join the program. Cut to 2 years later, and Olive is awkwardly kissing Dr. Adam Carlson after she ambushes him in the hallway. The start of the fake dating premise in this novel is pretty thin. So Olive was dating this guy named Jeremy, but like they didn't really hit it off. However, Jeremy and Olive's friend Ein are clearly into each other. So Olive needs Ein to believe that she is dating somebody else so that Ein won't feel weird about dating Jeremy. Olive tells Ein that she is on a date, but instead she goes to the lab. And then when Ein shows up at the lab, Olive decides to kiss Dr. Adam Carlson, who is literally the first man she sees. By the way, Jeremy is mentioned to have red hair, so I'm like, is he Hux? But I don't really know because he's not written as Hux. He's kind of written as this like generic nice guy. Ein is clearly Rose Tico, the only other female main character, and they are both Vietnamese women, so that's kind of obvious. But that also means Rose and Hux. Sure, why not? Anyway, after the kiss, Olive needs to keep up the fake dating premise for a while in order to convince Ein and Jeremy, and Adam is surprisingly okay with it. He says he has his own motivations, specifically that he is considered a flight risk by the university. Like, they think that he might leave Stanford for a different job somewhere else, so they are withholding some of his funding. But he says that if they see him putting down roots and getting into a relationship, then they might think that he's definitely going to stay and give him the money. It's so flimsy, but I also didn't really care because I was having a great time reading this book. But yeah, it is a pretty shaky premise, and that type of thinly veiled plot contrivance does reappear at multiple points throughout the story. Dr. Adam Carlson is seen as a jerk by literally all of the grad students. He is considered rude and terrifying, but also extremely intelligent and kind of attractive. He's basically hot Snape. He is also repeatedly described as a very large man. His bigness is brought up on multiple occasions. And is it weird? Yes. I went back and started to put blue stickies at each reference of his bigness, but I quickly realized that if I kept going, I was going to run out of blue stickies, so I stopped. He studied her for a long moment, his angular face serious, and something else. Something that she couldn't quite decipher because she was too busy noticing all over again how damn towering and broad he was. Just massive. Here she refers to him as a large warm weight suddenly steadying her. The second door opened directly onto the lab space, and maybe it was because he was as tall as Mount Everest and his shoulders were just as large, but Carlson was the very first thing she noticed. Which are idiotic, Adam said, gesturing dismissively with those huge hands of his. No offense, Dr. Carlson, but you're 3 times larger than Olive. If you stand, the room's going to burst. Before she could stop herself, Olive studied him from head to toe, taking in his large body, his broad shoulders, the way his hair was curling around his ears. Adam bent his head until his shoulders were still abnormally high, but somewhat easier to reach. And I mean, that's just some of them. It continues throughout the entire book. Obviously, there's a lot more at the beginning, but his bigness does come up later. I checked, and Adam Driver is 6'2". Is that tall? Yes. Is that an enormous circus sideshow of a man? No. Moving on from Adam's bigness, the chapters also each start with a little hypothesis that brings up something that's going to be addressed in that chapter. It's actually kind of a cute little touch for the story. Chapter 1's hypothesis says, when given a choice between A, slightly inconveniencing situation, and B, a colossal shit show with devastating consequences, I will inevitably end up selecting B. Now, if you have ever read any kind of romance story, you will realize several things immediately. The first being that Adam is the mystery bathroom man. Duh, right? But it takes Olive over 100 pages to realize this fact. I don't know how she didn't just recognize his voice. Secondly, Adam has agreed to this whole fake dating thing because he clearly has a secret crush on Olive. And she also does not realize this. She's not a very good scientist. And I think it plays into this common psychological element that's shared by many women. Certainly not all women, because some women have normal self-esteem. But there are many women who have low self-esteem and secretly believe that they are ugly trolls. However, they also secretly want to believe that they are wrong. That their low self-esteem simply blinds them to their true beauty, and they are actually stunning and amazing, and this super hot guy is secretly pining for them. I say them, but I also mean we. Wish fulfillment, and this book delivers it beautifully. Oh, Olive apologizes when they have to look like a couple in public and she has to sit on Adam's lap, or when they have to kiss passionately to keep up appearances, or when she has to apply sunscreen to his shirtless back. Oh, so sorry, Adam. This must be so awkward for you. And the author gives the reader these little tidbits about like Adam blushing or leaning into the kiss or gripping her waist. So that way, to us, it is obvious, but Olive stays oblivious. But we know. Oh, we know. Now, Olive and An have another friend named Malcolm. And Malcolm is the one that I could not entirely place. I'm guessing that he's Finn simply because of context, but his personality doesn't really seem like Finn. Like, Malcolm is very extroverted and just shy of flamboyantly gay. And Finn was a very reserved character. And we don't really get that much of a physical description of Malcolm to kind of like clue us in. The only thing the book really says early on is that he has black eyes. So I'm not entirely sure. There is one scene a little bit later when Olive is upset and Malcolm reaches across the table to take her hand, and the descriptor says that his hand was dark and warm, which I think is really odd phrasing, and it seems like it was just written that way to let us know that his skin is dark. If this is supposed to be a Finn proxy, I will be very curious how he plays out in the fanfic. I also don't really know how much of the original fanfic was changed for publication. Like, some enterprising souls out there have done comparisons between Master of the Universe and 50 Shades of Grey, and they've found that E.L. James just basically did like a find and replace on the names. But it is entirely possible that massive sections of Head Over Feet were rewritten into the love hypothesis. By the way, part of me wondered if Rey and Kylo would be scientists working on experiments related to this mysterious force. But no, Olive is working on experiments related to developing earlier testing for pancreatic cancer, because Olive's mom died from pancreatic cancer when Olive was 16. So that's the motivation for her character to become a scientist, and it's also kind of an adaptation of Rey's orphan backstory. Adam's mom was a diplomat. There's an ongoing romantic misunderstanding that occurs throughout the book, where Adam overhears Olive talking about how she's in love with someone, and it's him, but he assumes that it's not him. He does in fact assume that she is talking about Jeremy. And Adam's professor friend tells Olive about this girl that was in their department that Adam had this huge crush on for a long time. And of course it's Olive. But Olive thinks that it's not her. Idiots. It's delicious angst, all predicated on the fact that these characters are terrible communicators. Meanwhile, Olive reaches out to a Harvard scientist named Tom Benson, asking to be able to come work in his lab for a year because his lab at Harvard has some sort of more advanced, expensive equipment that she needs for her research. Now, I totally thought that Tom Benson was going to be a Luke Skywalker proxy, but then they mentioned that Tom Benson was a handsome, charming, 30-something blonde man. So not Luke. So then I thought that he was Poe Dameron and the author made him blonde to throw us off. Fortunately, I realized that he was not Poe Dameron because Tom Benson is very obnoxious and quickly becomes the villain of this piece. There was another professor, Holden Rodriguez, and I should have seen it since Rodriguez is a typically Hispanic name, but he is the Poe Dameron proxy. He doesn't really have any solid character building scenes until about halfway through the book, but once we meet him and he has some dialogue, it's pretty obvious. Also, his parents and Adam's parents were friends, and they were both diplomats, and so he and Adam were friends since they were kids. There are no references to his teenage years transporting drugs, though. When I was reading, I actually had to page back a while because I wanted to confirm an earlier scene where Malcolm was talking about a handsome professor who smiled at him, and I thought it was Rodriguez, but I wasn't sure because I didn't know that he was a character that I was going to have to pay attention to yet, and it was him. Oh yeah? What about Holden Rodriguez? He's hot. Cute smile, too. I would know. He always smiles at me. Olive burst into laughter. I could never fake date Dr. Rodriguez, not with how assiduously you've been thirsting after him for the past 2 years. So let's talk about Tom Benson. I have no idea what character this is supposed to correlate to in Star Wars. Is he Hux? It's a very Hux-like personality. But if he's Hux, then who's Jeremy? I'm kind of hoping that I read the fanfic and they're like, hello, this is Thomas Snoke. But actually, I'd be willing to bet that Snoke is the abusive post-grad mentor that Adam mentions at one point, so... Anyway, so Tom accepts Olive into his post-grad research thingy so she can come to Harvard and use his lab for a year. Harvard is also trying to recruit Adam. And since it looks like Olive is going to be going to Harvard for a year, and Adam is secretly in love with Olive, he thinks it's pretty likely that he is going to accept Tom's offer to come to Harvard and do science together, or whatever. Can you tell I glazed over some of the science parts? However, the climax of this story takes place at the big science conference. Adam and Olive end up having to share a room, of course. And Olive had a paper that was accepted for her to give a talk, which is like kind of a big deal in this setting. And she decides that she's going to record her talk so she can show it to her advisor, who could not be there, and also show it to Adam, who also can't be there because he's the keynote speaker. Hello, it's Christina from the future. I just wanted to warn you that the USB mic cut out. So for the next roughly 3.5 minutes, you're going to hear the very subpar camera audio before the USB mic comes back in. So I just wanted to warn you so you would not be surprised by the sudden changes in audio quality. Thank you, and I'm sorry. Tom is also on Olive's panel. And after she gives the talk and the whole thing is done and the room empties out, Tom comes on to her and blatantly sexually harasses her. He tells her pretty explicitly that she is a mediocre scientist, but a smart girl who understands that she needs to sleep her way to the top, and that he 100% expects her to sleep with him in exchange for being brought into the Harvard lab. He also tells her not to tell Adam because, firstly, he and Adam are old friends and Adam probably won't believe her, and secondly, it'll mess up Adam's chances to come work at Harvard. Olive is upset, of course, and she doesn't tell Adam exactly why. She just tells him that she overheard someone insulting her research, but he consoles her. And then we get about 2 solid chapters of sex. It is very graphic. It is very graphic, NC-17 fanfiction style sex, which I should have expected, but somehow didn't. It's all very well written though, it's not even remotely cringy, and everything that happens feels very in tune with the characters and how they've been established thus far. 2 whole chapters! Way to go, guys! You know that the sex is about to begin because Adam pulls a very fanfic move. So Olive is like, oh, you don't find me attractive. And Adam grabs her hand and is like, I'll show you how attractive I find you. And I'm trying to keep this video like PG-13, so I'm not going to say what he does. But if you have ever read any sort of, R or NC-17 rated fanfic, you know. Anyway, so after their 2-chapter night together, Olive decides that she needs to break up with Adam because she can't go to Harvard now after Tom's harassment, and she doesn't want to ruin Adam's chances at going to Harvard. And plus, there's that mystery woman that he's in love with that she heard about earlier that's definitely not her. And Adam is clearly devastated, but he accepts the breakup because he knows that she's secretly in love with that guy who's definitely not him. So Olive begins to try to find another lab placement, and it turns out that particularly after the talk she gave at like the prestigious science conference, lots of labs are interested in hosting her research, so yay. And remember how I said that she recorded her talk? Well, she caught all of Tom's harassment on video. With evidence in hand, she decides that she needs to tell Adam the truth. So she barges into a Harvard interview dinner where Adam is there, Tom is present, and there's like a bunch of old dudes, and she plays the video. Adam is furious, Tom is fired, and Olive is vindicated. While Adam is yelling at Tom, he refers to Olive as the woman he loves. And of course, Olive notices this. So later, she tells Adam that she is in love with him too, and they get back together. They also go on a double date with Finn and Poe. Malcolm and Holden. We flash forward a year and we see that they are still happily together, and the book ends with their 1-year anniversary and the two of them going back to the lab to recreate their first kiss. There are just so many tropes in this book, but I don't usually read romance books. I don't usually read books where the romance is the primary plot. So this was actually a lot of fun for me. The author has a writing style that I really connect with. She's very funny. I really like the way that she writes dialogue, particularly the witty banter. It's got kind of a quirky slant to it, but without going too far and kind of tumbling into that early 2000s, oh my god, so random penguin kind of vibe. I can see that type of tone in the distance, and I feel like the author was probably one of those girls when she was young, but we never even get close to that kind of point. It's just something that I can recognize a little bit. The author is also a scientist herself, so some of the jargon went way over my head, but I still appreciated it because I knew that it was probably accurate, and I liked that she didn't dumb those things down, even though I didn't really understand it, but I could figure out enough just from context clues. But I think my favorite thing about this book is that it does not give a damn about its Star Wars fanfic origins. In fact, there is a Star Wars reference in the book. On page 181, Olive is talking about a previous interaction she had with Holden Rodriguez, aka Poe. And yet, Olive had mostly pleasant memories of her interactions with him. When she'd stammered her way through her committee meetings, he'd always been the first to smile at her. And once he'd even complimented her Star Wars t-shirt. And then proceeded to hum the Darth Vader theme under his breath every time Dr. Moss would start one of her rants against Olive's methods. And, as if that wasn't enough, the back of the book has this sentence. Convincing Ein that Olive is dating and well on her way to a happily ever after was always going to take more than hand-wavy Jedi mind tricks. Amazing. When you have a fanfic turned published novel, I think that's the best way to play it. Just make tongue-in-cheek references to the source material. I respect it. What I'm wondering now is who was Tom? And who was Jeremy? Because was one of those characters Hux? Which one? And if Hux is one of them, then who is the other one? I don't know. I don't know. Was one of them... I really hope one of them was Thomas Snoke. That would just make my day. And now, on to the fanfic. Head over feet, the fanfic. Okay, so Jeremy was Hux, and Tom Benton was Captain Phasma, which I did not see coming, except that Benton/Phasma isn't really a character in the fanfic. That whole plotline is just gone. And I will circle back to that later. But first, let's talk about the fanfic file and structure. The PDF has a bunch of little interesting tidbits of data. I haven't read a fanfic in like a really long time, so seeing author's notes and story tags was just sending me back. So, the reason why the Ein Jeremy thing seemed so forced and the premise seemed so flimsy is because it was different in the fanfic. Jeremy was Hux, but instead of being a guy that Olive/Ray dated who now her friend was interested in, he was Hux, but harassing her in the lab to go out with him. And when she runs into him in the lab, she kisses the first man that she sees in an attempt to get Hux to leave her alone. And this just makes way more sense. This Hux is written like Hux. He's written like a smug jerk, whereas Jeremy was just kind of this very bland, very generic, nice guy who had red hair. It's weird reading this because a lot of the initial Ein scenes in the book that didn't entirely ring true are mostly the same, but with the huge difference that instead of like the well-meaning but kind of disbelieving best friend, it's now a very snide Hux trying to prove that Ray and Ben aren't dating. Due to the Hux thing, the primary reason that Ben gives for going along with the fake dating scheme is purely just to annoy Hux because Ben does not like him. The whole thing about the deadline and the department withholding funding because they think that he's a flight risk is not there in the fanfic. In the book, they decided that they were going to fake date until some specific point in time that was about a month away after some sort of important meeting related to Adam's funding. But again, that's not a thing in the fanfic. The deadline is not there at all. The funding plot line is totally gone. Oh, also, the first kiss scene in the book, Olive makes it a point to say that she asked Adam for permission to kiss him, that she asked him for consent, and that she thought he said yes, but he actually kind of just like grunted in confusion or whatever. And in the fanfic, Hux mentions how he saw the kiss and it looked very non-consensual. So I bet that this was a detail that kind of just like bothered the author, so she fixed it in the published version. A lot of the scenes and plot beats are the same between the book and the fanfic. It's just that some of them appear in kind of different places. And there's a scene in the book where Olive and her friends go to a department picnic and they see Adam playing frisbee and he's all hot and sweaty. And then Olive applies sunscreen on him and then they have the picnic and then Adam moves a car with his bare hands and then gets all hot and sweaty again. And Ein tells Olive, like, go kiss your boyfriend, and then she does. But in the fanfic, Ray sees Ben at the gym, and it's not Ein/Rose, it's some other friend who's like, hey, go say hi to your boyfriend. And so Ray does, and because the friend is watching them so intently, Ray and Ben kiss there in the gym. But there is still the department picnic scene and the sweaty frisbee and the sunscreen. There is just no subsequent, like, Ben moving a car with his bare hands and kiss in the parking lot scene. Also, I didn't explicitly mention it, but I was correct, and Ein was in fact Rose Tico. A lot of the Ein/Rose scenes from the book are actually just a variety of different characters in the fanfic. You know, reading the book and then seeing the original intent is kind of bringing up some cracks in the book story that I hadn't really thought too much about before. Ein/Rose is much less of a character in the fanfic than she is in the book. In the book, she is very present. She's Olive's best friend. She dates Jeremy. She asks Olive a lot about Adam. She talks a lot about women in STEM and diversity in STEM. But I had kind of thought that she seemed like a little bit of a mishmash of a character, and this is probably why. There's still the scene where Ben overhears Ray say that she's in love with someone, and of course he still assumes that it's not him. But since there's no Jeremy in the fanfic, and she's definitely not into Hux, it's not really clear who Ben thinks that she's actually in love with. Also, there's no Star Wars reference in the fanfic. The shirt that Rey mentions that she wore, that in the book is described as a Star Wars shirt, is a Bob's Burgers shirt in the fanfic. So the author deliberately changed that for publication, which I really like that. The fanfic doesn't go into Rey's background as much. It's just kind of mentioned that she spent time in foster homes as a kid. So there's nothing about her mom or about pancreatic cancer research at all. In fact, the research that Rey is doing is kept pretty vague. Rey's last name is Sanders in this, which is pretty funny because she's from a sand planet. Ben is, of course, Dr. Ben Solo. I'd kind of suspected in the book that some of the other minor characters mentioned were probably Star Wars characters, but they weren't really described in enough detail to be able to identify who they might be. But the fanfic reveals that Olive's advisor, Dr. Aslan, is actually Dr. Holdo. I pegged Finn and Poe correct. Oh, I should use a different terminology. I identified Finn and Poe correctly as Malcolm and Holden. So in terms of writing and plot and scenes, the fanfic and the book are very similar. A lot of the major scenes even have most of the same lines, at least for the first half of the fanfic. And I will explain a little bit more about that later. But aside from the things that I already mentioned, there are some other small differences in the first half of the book. You can tell that an editor went through it and just tightened things up. The prologue from the book about the mystery guy in the bathroom who gives Olive life advice, that is not the opening of the fanfic. The fanfic just opens right with the kiss. And the little hypothesis at the start of each chapter is just a book thing. Okay, so now let's talk about the Tom Benson plotline. As I said, Tom Benson is Captain Phasma, except Captain Phasma's not really a character in the fanfic. The only way to really identify that she and Tom are the same is because she gives a presentation in the fanfic that was given by Tom in the book. There's no emailing Captain Phasma to go work in her lab. There's no interview. There's no Harvard. In the book, Tom Benson and Adam, I am really struggling to make sure that I use the right names with the right material. Tom Benson and Adam are old friends, and that's how Olive meets Tom. Like, they have lunch together, and Tom is staying with Adam, and Tom is the one who gives Olive a placement in her lab, and then he harasses her and kind of drives a wedge between her and Adam. So he is a major source of conflict in the book. But in the fanfic, after Rey's presentation, she just hears some scientists talking about her and talking about her work and saying that she was just picked to give a talk because she was a woman and they wanted some diversity for the conference. It's basically what Tom Benson said to Olive, but without the sexual harassment component. There was an author note in the fanfic about how harassment is a really serious issue for women in STEM, and she knew that the fanfic was not going to give the topic its due because, like, it was a fanfic and she wanted to, hurry up and get to the sexy parts. So I wonder if the author added the whole Tom Harvard harassment thing into the book in order to be able to address the topic in a much more significant way, as well as add some larger conflict to the story. By the way, there is no Harvard subplot at all. Rey's not looking for a lab to further her research, and Ben is not interviewing for a job. So without all of that, and without the deadline for their relationship, I was so curious what was going to cause the inevitable breakup after their 2-chapter night together. Speaking of the 2-chapter night, it is mostly the same between the fanfic and the book, but there are 2 differences that I noticed. In the fanfic, there is a scene where Rey says, "Stop." And the audience knows that she doesn't really mean it, and so Ben keeps going. But in the book, in the same scene, Olive says stop, and Adam stops immediately and asks her if she's okay. The second difference has to do with the weird refractory period issue thing. And the author says in an author's note that she knows that that's not how things work. So I'm sure just for biological accuracy, that is a thing that had to get changed for publication. And then the biggest change between the fanfic and the book. The thing that changes the entire second half of the fanfic to make it very different from the second half of the book. I'm phrasing this weird as if the fanfic came second, but it came first. You guys know that. Anyway, we get a POV change. Yes, we get a bunch of chapters from Ben's point of view. So half of the sex is from Ben's point of view. And then they don't break up at the hotel. Instead of going to a Harvard interview, Ben just leaves early to go home, and the story continues from his point of view. By the way, we get a great phone conversation between Poe and Ben, where Poe is looking for advice regarding dating a student, i.e. Finn, and we also learn that Poe has a dog named BB. Ben goes to feed and walk BB. He finds out that Huck's just up and left. He goes to a meeting. He listens to Poe talk a lot about Finn. And so, when Rey gets back from the conference, Ben is the one to end things. He's been angsting this whole time about how she's in love with somebody else, and he feels that he took advantage of her. And now that Hux is gone, there's just no reason to continue their fake relationship. Things are going off the rails at this point. They have very dramatic breakup sex on his desk in his office. And then it switches back to Rey's point of view for a scene where she finds an almost naked Poe Dameron wandering around her kitchen because remember, she's roommates with Finn. She talks with a friend about how Ben is Luke Skywalker's nephew and used to work at his lab before they had a falling out, and then Ben went to go work for Snoke's lab. Finn and Poe are heavy on the PDA, but they still manage to invite Rey out for dinner with them, and then of course they rope Ben into going too. And this is the same dinner scene that we see in the end of the book, except at this point in the book, Adam and Olive, these names, I'm struggling. Adam and Olive have gotten back together, and at this point in the fanfic, Ray and Ben have not. So, you know how I said that the fanfic doesn't have that prologue from the book where Olive meets the mystery bathroom man and they talk about her career? Well, that scene is still here. It's just not the opening. In the restaurant, Poe mentions that Ben has had a crush on Ray for years, ever since they met when she came in for her grad school interview. And then we get the flashback to the bathroom scene. Although this time, even though Ray still couldn't see him, he told her his name was Ben. So I really feel like she should have just put the pieces together. Okay, so then we are back in the restaurant and we are back in Ben's point of view. Poe makes Ben pay for dinner because he's rich. And then Ray convinces Ben to walk her back to her apartment. So this means that we are more in Ben's head, and it's all written in third person, but you know what I mean. But we're more in Ben's head while Ray is realizing that he's in love with her. And then, of course, she tells him that she's in love with him too, and they get together. In the last chapter, to wrap up the story, we are back in Ray's perspective, and it is 4 years later, and she and Ben are married, and they are in the process of doing a green card interview because Ray is from the UK. They did make jokes earlier in the book about like getting married for a green card, so this isn't entirely out of left field. While they're answering the green card questions, we do get flashbacks to like the relevant moments in the past 4 years of their relationship. And there is more sex in the flashbacks because fanfic. And Ben actually proposes during sex because fanfic. There's a flashback to when Ray, Ben, Finn, and Poe all dressed up as Game of Thrones characters for Halloween. And they made Ben be Arya. The last green card question is, what did they do for their first anniversary? And that's where we get the scene where they went back to the lab to recreate their first kiss, which is the last scene of the book, just without the green card interview framing device. The story ends with an author's note encouraging readers to download and save her stories because she's been thinking of taking them down and reworking them into something original. And here we are. Full circle. It's interesting because scenes that were a little bit choppy or weak in the book didn't quite fit because they were changed in some way from the fanfic. And scenes from the fanfic that were a little bit iffy were strengthened for the book. So when you combine these two works together, you get a very solid story. Overall, this was a really fun project for me. I liked reading the book, I liked reading the fanfic. It was kind of trippy because the two of them were similar yet different enough to kind of give you the same feeling as rewatching a movie that you only saw once, but it was like 10 years ago and you were drunk. So it's like the same, but it's not the same. I hope they make this book into a movie. I would go see it in theaters. Like I would leave my house and everything. I also feel like Oscar Isaac and John Boyega would totally be willing to reprise their Star Wars proxy characters so they can finally kiss on screen. I feel really weird that this video has nothing to cut to. That it's just like my face for an hour. I should have gotten puppets.